area of your work. So we hope you find it very valuable today.
Absolutely. All right, Beth. Well, what number of people have just logged in, and I see a few more folks in the queue, but we've got the recording started. So while those folks are getting logged in, why don't we get started for everyone else to try to be prompt here and get started. So everyone, thank you again, as Beth said, for logging in today and being part of our webinar using imaging data to market your medical device. It's kind of fun to put together a webinar. ImageIQ has done a webinar series now for several years. And generally, our webinar series are relatively technical in nature. You know, we're either talking about how to do image analysis, how to acquire images. We did an image modality primer. We did a really nice series with our friends at OrthoWorld with a 60 and 60 webinar, kind of a speed dating thing. But they've all been very technical. Now we get to do a marketing webinar. So that is really exciting. And for those of you who haven't been on one of our webinars before, I'm Tim Colbago. I'm the CEO of ImageIQ. I have a number of years in the medical imaging industry, ranging from being kind of the chief technology officer and doing a general manager role and CEO here at ImageIQ, and everything from software and hardware and things like that. That's really cool. And what we do here at ImageIQ, just to give you a short version of that, is, you know, we like to call ourselves your imaging experts. Some people like to use the word CRO. We're an imaging CRO. We do that. We do contract research work. We also do, you know, consulting work. We actually build software for people. So this is kind of the ImageIQ webinar series. And joining us today is my dear friend, a wonderful colleague, and someone I just love working with, Beth Ross Johnson. And I'm going to let her take an opportunity to introduce herself a little and tell you a little bit about her background.
Well, thanks, Tim. It's good to be in a mutual admiration society. I'm Beth Ross Johnson, and I have a marketing agency. I've been doing this for the last 6 years. And prior to that, I've worked in just about every aspect of healthcare that there is, whether it's healthcare IT, medical device development, and provider business development, as well as marketing. So I started out my career on the marketing side in the provider world and fell in love with the technologies that really run the world of medicine. And so I've been really working more in that sector for about the last 15 years. And had the opportunity to work with Tim at Merge Healthcare, where Tim served as Chief Technology Officer and then went on to be General Manager and Chief Strategy Officer, et cetera. So we actually got the opportunity to operationalize together a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about today. So I'm glad to be here. Thanks for dialing in.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us. And let's get started. As you know, as I'm looking at the folks dialing in here, we've got a few other folks in the queue. So real quick, let me give you some of the logistics for today. Those of you who are maybe having technical problems with the GoToMeeting part of this, we'll start right here. You can give us a call if you can hear me, but you can't see. You're welcome to give us a call. Use our toll-free number. It's 855-462-4347. That's 462-4347. It's 855-462-4347. It actually spells 855 ImageIQ, which is kind of cool. If you've got any questions, the folks here will help you out. Logistics for today, real quick. We have you all on mute because of the number of people we get to these webinars. We don't want everybody hearing each other's dogs and car doors, and some people are watching this on their iPhone or iPad or mobile device or something like that. So you're on mute. We are recording the webinar, and that'll be available on our website probably within a couple of days after the webinar. We just need to polish it up and get a landing page for it. We're roughly guessing there's going to be about 35, maybe 40 minutes of presentation, and there'll be room and time for questions at the end if you have any. The way you're going to do that is in your GoToMeeting interface, there's a little question box, and if at any point in time during the webinar you want to type a question, feel free. I'll be fielding the questions with Beth. We won't get to them real time per se. We're going to kind of put them at the end, but you feel free to type them at any point you want. And a number of folks are still logging in, but we're going to keep on rolling because I don't want to delay the folks who are able to get here at the top of the hour. So let's get started. And if you've ever been to an ImageIQ webinar, you know we always like to start with a story because it kind of sets the tone for the webinar. So here's our story for this. And strangely enough, in a marketing webinar, we're talking about resumes in the interview. I happen to have a much younger brother who is a little earlier in his career than I am, and he has hit that point in his career that I'm sure many of us have, or many of us will hit, where you're ready to go get your second job, right? So you convince somebody that that whole education thing you got has value and you've got a real job. And he worked for a company for a long, long time, and he called me and he said, hey, I'm thinking about interviewing for this other job. You've interviewed a bunch of technical professionals. Would you help me? Would you help me prepare for the interview? I'm sure. What are you going to say in the interview? You know, what are you going to say? And he started with, he said, well, you know, I want to tell them that, you know, I'm looking to get a better title, and I'm hoping maybe to get paid more, and I want to do this, and I want to do this. And I said, stop. You just need to stop. I said, I appreciate all of that, but you need to remember about the most popular radio station in the country. And Beth, you want to tell everybody what the most popular radio station in the country is?
That radio station, as a matter of fact, we're all listening to it this very moment, and it's called WIIFM, and that stands for What's in It for Me. And anytime you make a decision, and applying that to your customers, anytime your customers make a decision, they turn up the volume. Now, when you read our literature about this webinar, you turned up the volume. Something about what they said gathered your interest, and you had a benefit that you're looking for, and that's why you're here today. And so, you know, listening to WIIFM, we do it 24/7, or at least in the waking hours.
That's right. That's right. And so, you know, my guidance to my brother was, you know, you need to go into your interview and you need to explain how you want to help the company. Look, I can be a part of your team and I can make this work. And so that really sets the tone for anything you do in marketing, of course, but specifically we're going to talk about how to use image analysis and imaging in telling that marketing story and ultimately telling your potential clients what's in it for them. So what you're going to learn today is a really nice topic here, a nice set of topics. One of the things you're going to learn is the 5 benefits that are most important to physicians when they're trying to make a decision. And if you take nothing away from this webinar other than these 5 benefits, I would encourage you to get a sticky note and a pencil out, and it's going to be, I think, the very next slide, and take these 5 benefits away. Yeah.
Tim, can I just mention, too, the reason we're focusing on physicians in particular is because pretty much any medical device, whether either a physician is going to be using it or he is going to have some control and say over the purchase. And so we thought it would be pertinent to just focus in on physicians. But you'll also notice as we're going through all these that most of these things are important to all of us.
That's correct. That's correct. We're also going to share with you the impact the visual story can have on clarifying those benefits, because that's really, as ImageIQ, that's part of our passion. And so we want to share that a little bit with you. We also want to help you find the hidden imaging treasures in your organization. One of the things you're going to discover is that there's a lot of powerful stories you can tell, and you might have the question, well, how do I do that? And we'll give you a little insight on how to do that and a place to go to figure out how you can find the fact that you might actually already have a lot of this data. We'll give you a few real-life examples of using imaging to market your medical devices, and we're going to actually give you a few tactics that seem to be coming up and working well in our world, and with Beth as our marketing expert here in the general marketing community as to what actually happens. So, you know, when Beth and I were working together at Merge, she introduced these 5 benefits to me. And it really changed how we looked at our product development, where we actually captured, using those 5 benefits, we reflected that into everything we did around product development. So I thought it would be fine. It would be really valuable if we had Beth start and explain where the 5 benefits came from and how they can help you market your product a little more.
Thanks, Tim. Well, early in my career, I worked for a large multi-specialty group practice of at that time it was about 100 physicians, and they grew to about 270 physicians over time. But it became pretty apparent to me early on that physicians kind of had unique characteristics, and that I didn't necessarily know everything I needed to know to learn how to get things done in a physician environment. So I went on a quest to find out how are decisions made by physicians? Do they have really unique characteristics, or was it kind of all in my head? So I started researching, and those were in pre-internet days, so it wasn't an easy quest, but started researching who had done any studies or any work in working with physicians and how decisions are made and how they value things. And the only thing I found, which, thankfully it came my way, was Dr. David Powell, who's a behavioral scientist, and at that time he was running an organization called the Institute for Clinical Management. And it was really just rich with information about how to work with physicians, how to help them make decisions, how to get things done in an organization where there might be a lot of competing benefits or agendas with individuals. And so from that, Dr. Powell had a textbook, and there was a study referenced in that textbook that was done by a group of his graduate students. And they interviewed a set of behavioral development questions. So they didn't just go out and say, hey, what's most important to you? It's all based on the science of behavioral. It was all based on behavioral science. And so what they found from that study is that there were 5 primary benefits that physicians want. They want to be able to earn more, learn more, exert influence, develop relationships, and this is an interesting one, relieve suffering, their own or that of their patients. And you could insert the word hassles when it comes to their own. And I would have to say the successes that I have had in my career have been based upon this very, very unique set of benefits that physicians want and how to use information and how to communicate based upon those 5 primary benefits.
Right, and today, Beth, what we're going to do is we're going to have you walk us through these 5 benefits, explain a little more about them, because obviously in a list like this, that's very high level. We're going to dig down a little bit, and then what I'll do is I'll kind of play color commentator for you and insert some examples of how you can show someone how they can earn more by using imaging or learn more by delivering imaging, and that's going to be really interesting. So that's kind of be the structure of what we do. So let's start with Beth telling us a little bit about, why physicians, and this might be surprising to everyone on the call, I don't know, but why physicians are actually motivated a little bit by learning how to earn more.
Thanks, Tim. In the world of corporate business, when we think of earn more, we think of salary and total comp and benefits and maybe stock options and all those kinds of things. But in the world of a physician that
I get lunch.
Selling,
I get lunch.
And you get lunch and you get heating during business hours.
Yes.
I think that's part of, yes, heating. So
that's true.
But for a physician, it's different. For them, a lot of the time, it's more time. And it's a challenging time to be a physician with all the changes, et cetera. And I continue to have provider clients, and I can tell you it's more challenging than any time it's been in my career for physicians to practice medicine. So they have a lot of unproductive time, and of course, time is money if you're a physician, in particular if you're a surgeon. And so they want less unproductive time. They want less documentation. As an example, and this was a good number of years ago, but when I worked for that large practice, as they grew, they wanted to have their own ambulatory surgical center, and I knew that since even though they would own this surgical center, sometimes if the 5, or I should say not all 5, but the benefits that were most important to the surgeon weren't there, even though they owned it, they would still go and practice at their primary hospital. So I went out and I met with about 25 surgeons with these 5 primary benefits, in particular earn more on my mind. And so one of the things that came out of those interviews was something I never would have thought of. And they said what was important to them was OR turnover time. I thought, OR, I never would have guessed that in a million years. And when I asked them to explain more, they said, look, we can do, of course they're all surgeons, we can do so many surgeries in a day. And what happens is we do a surgery, and let's say it's a minimally invasive surgery, and let's say it takes a half hour, et cetera. It takes the hospital an hour and a half to turn over the operating room. Okay, they're very busy. They didn't have a lot of free operating room space, and so they said that was just so frustrating. And so when we started the ambulatory surgery center, when I interviewed nurses, I said, well, OR nurses, I said, we're going to have 5-minute OR turnovers. What do you think about that? And if the nurse responded and said, well, that can't be done, then I thought, you're not the right candidate. And if someone said, well, that'd be kind of cool. There's a lot of wasted time in there. How do you think we'd do that? Then I knew they were right. And, of course, the outcome of that, because I understood what was motivating the surgeons, is we were profitable in 3 months. And you know, the comment after comment was how good it was to be able, for instance, at that time, if you're an ophthalmologist, you could do a dozen cataracts in a morning. Okay, so that helped them make more money. They get more time, less unproductive. They can do more procedures. Of course, in the Affordable Care Act, they need to have improved quality data. So anything in your medical device that you have that is going to help them meet meaningful use and improve quality data and improve their reimbursement is crucial. If you're an accountable care organization, right, and you want to focus on profitability, then anything your product does that requires fewer unnecessary procedures, so for instance, incremental imaging studies, et cetera, anything that can help them reduce costs, they will feel that will be a tremendous benefit. But again, you have to be able to show them. And here's where the rubber kind of meets the road is, okay, these are right up until now you look at this and you go, you know, Beth, all that makes sense. But how do you actualize it? Now Tim's going to be showing us how to take this benefit and apply it in your world using imaging.
Yeah, absolutely, Beth. And you know, that's a good point. You know, earn more isn't always necessarily just about the paycheck. It is, but there are a lot of drivers in that, especially in today's healthcare environment. So one of the examples we wanted to show you is an example where we had a client who had built a resorbable screw. And you know, the benefit of this product, the reason they thought the resorbable screw concept was really important was it had several benefits to the surgeons and the hospitals and the centers that were buying this. They felt it would, by being a resorbable screw, it would reduce post-surgery complication, and it would also reduce the probability of revision, right? But they had a problem. They could say that until they were blue in the face, but they had to show something. They had to tell the story, and they wanted to tell that story visually. They wanted to show people that their screw was stable, because you know, when you think about something that does resorb back into the body, that could create a problem, right? They wanted to show the rate that screw was resorbed, and they wanted to show the subsequent bone regrowth where the screw was. I don't know if that's good English on the slide, but where the screw was, and they wanted to be able to give people the confidence that if they did this, that they would benefit by earning more. And so they went to a group and said, hey, you know, Ken, if I give you all this data that we have, and it happened to be, in this case, post-market data, we'll talk about that in a second, you know, what can you do for me? And the team that they went to kind of said, you know, I'm not sure we can give you all that data. That's very complicated. We're talking about three-dimensional measurements. We're talking about three-dimensional measurements over time. So if you want to be cool about it, if you want to be geeky about it, you can say it's four-dimensional data, right? And they're like, wow, that's a big deal. I don't know if we can show you that. So they came to ImageIQ, and we were able to do some work for them. But here's the fun part. We ended up giving them data. And data is kind of neat, and they get data tables like this. And you can see that, and we're not going to go over all this data by any stretch of the imagination, but you can see that they looked at all the surgical, the 2 surgical techniques that they used, and they started tracking maximum tunnel diameter at the baseline before, you know, right after surgery, 6 months after surgery, 12 months, and 24 months after surgery. And they were able to tell a story that said, listen, that tunnel diameter is not fundamentally widening any more that would cause any kind of instability. We can show you the change in the tunnel diameter compared to the baseline, and we were producing all this data for them. And they're like, man, you need to tell me more. Tell me more. This is great. You got all this data from my images. And that's the fun part, right? That's the part where we're like, yeah, we got all this data out of the images you had. Really, what else did you get? What else did you get? We said, well, now you can also tell a story about bone regrowth inside the tunnel. And again, by surgical technique, we were able to show them the data of how much the bone regrew into the tunnel as a percentage of volume, and we can get very scientific here. But we were able to show this data, and we were able to extract all this data from their images. Now, you might say, and this is a whole different webinar, by the way, folks, and I hate to say that, but Beth and I actually struggled as we put this together because we had so much to tell you. But one of the things I'll just touch on briefly, really briefly, is this was actually a retrospective study. And so what we ended up doing is we had to take an inventory of the data that they had and see which image sets they had, and actually, get into crazy things like, well, what scanner was it on? What resolution was that scanner taken on? Did all that stuff, did all that stuff fit in our ability to help them tell a scientific story? And it turned out that we can. But this is kind of the inventory of the pictures that we took. But with that retrospective data, we were able to extract all, or images, we were able to extract all the data you just saw, and they were able to tell the story. But it doesn't end there. The fun part about being in an imaging company is people pay us to take their images and extract that data. And that data is the lifeblood of what they do. But when we're in a marketing webinar, and ultimately you do have to tell this story to people, you want to show them. And so what we were able to do is from their own images, we were able to produce these wonderful little movies. And just to give you a quick rundown on this thing, it's not terribly complicated. The movie you see on the 3 screws here are 3 different time points for the same patient. The little gray kind of thing that looks like where the screw is actually the tunnel that was created, and that's how we measured tunnel widening and the tunnel diameter. The thing you see in green there on the left is actually the screw that was placed in the patient. The big red thing is a osteoconductive bone graft, and then blue is new bone growth. And we were able to show how the screw, in fact, does resorb into the body relatively quickly, and that new bone fills in that tunnel. A real powerful story that they were able to use to go to their surgeons and say, listen, if you use this, right, you're going to see more stability in your patient. You're going to have less follow-up exams. You're going to be able to see, kind of less expense and therefore earn more. And so there was really clear evidence of product performance. And ultimately, as marketers, I know you all probably struggle with this a little bit, is that it helped connect the dots. It helped connect the dots between features and benefits, right? That's always a tricky thing, right? And in this case, we were able to tell a story about earning more. And, Beth, before we get you, I think our next step is learn more, right? Before we get too far into that, we should probably point out that, a lot of times these benefits cross between all those 5 things, right? The 5 things on our list. It's not like
Absolutely.
This was just learn more. Right.
Right, exactly. And the other thing, there's a little bit of caveat in using these. As marketers, right, we are marketing to groups of individuals, targeted groups. Usually they're discrete groups, and in this case we're talking about physicians. But when it comes to an individual physician, there's no way to assume. What you really have to do is use the art and science of asking questions to truly understand what is important to an individual. So just a little caveat on that. And just, Tim, if you could go back, could you go back to your last slide?
I can. I have that technology.
You can backwards. This is awesome.
I do. There's a backwards arrow right there. No problem.
Thanks to the technology, Bill Gates. Okay. What I just want to make a comment on the power of a visual story. Now, prior to that, obviously it all starts with the data, right? I mean, physicians, we're going to get into this because they are learners and lifelong learners, they want the data. And so you can certainly provide all that data, but you know how stretched physicians are for time? When you can tell a story visually using an image versus here's all the data and here, we're 26% better. Okay, now go to the next slide, to my next slide, Jim.
You got it, absolutely.
Sorry, that wasn't in rehearsal. But
that's okay.
Now they want to know why. They want the details. They are lifelong learners, and it isn't just, me who believes that, and the study and Dr. Powell's study. They have an innate curiosity. Well, how did that work? Well, how much better did it work? Well, why did it work? Show me, show me, show me. And again, that's the power of a visual story. And there was a nationwide study done by Thomas Jefferson University, showed that 75% of physicians considered lifelong learning to be one of the top 5 competencies just to be a good physician. So the more information you can provide that helps them have greater and deeper clinical understanding, the better, and the greater likelihood is that they are going to be interested in your product and find it appealing. In addition to that, the American Medical Association has adopted 9 principles of medical ethics, and I'll quote this from them: a physician shall continue to study, apply, and advance scientific knowledge. So anything you can do to help them with that is very, very motivating. So how do you do that with images?
Absolutely, absolutely, Bethany. That's a very good point. And so we've got another case study here, and let's give you an example here. This is an example that actually intersects imaging in a couple of cool ways, but this is again how imaging was used to tell a story. We had a client who had a cleared device, so it was 510K cleared to automatically deliver contrast to patients during radiological exams. And the idea here was they wanted to show something. They wanted to show that by using their device over the standard of care, that they could improve the detection of pulmonary embolism. Now, you can imagine, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, there are papers that they're working on publishing and all that kind of stuff. And keeping in mind for everybody on the call, this is kind of like when you go to the movie and they say, the names have been changed to protect the innocent. What was that? Dragnet or something like that? You used to say that at the beginning, or I think it was Dragnet. It doesn't matter. Anyway, we've changed some of the data here, so we're not, divulging any confidential secrets. But the concepts certainly you will certainly understand. But they wanted to show this, and of course you could run the classic double-blind study. But they had a problem trying to educate their clientele in their marketing efforts on why this was better, and they wanted to help them learn more. They needed to prove that they could deliver more consistency with the contrast, improved contrast, and give them insight, give their clients insight and knowledge and learning into the detection of pulmonary emboli. So that was really kind of an interesting thing. And as a complete sidebar, and obviously well before we made this webinar, if any of you follow the radiology world, Aunt Minnie just ran a real nice article on, I believe it was the guys at Philips, my old stomping ground actually, who developed a computer-aided diagnosis system to detect pulmonary embolism, and they have some preliminary studies that have come out that suggest it's working particularly well, and so that's pretty cool. And maybe if they want to see it working even better, they'll give ImageIQ a call or something like that. But that's a whole different part of the webinar or something. Their goal was to try to explain to physicians that when you take a CT exam and do this visualization, that there is more in that data than you can see with a standard of care contrast delivery system. And actually, this is this quick little video I'll play for you here. Whoops, pressed the wrong button. We'll kind of give you an idea of what that might look like as you go through this. And this is kind of the standard 3D rendering. Everybody's got one of these. But if you actually do contrast management and contrast detection correctly, you can actually see the entire pulmonary vasculature, and that's what you see here in green. And they wanted to share it with people and educate them. Hey, listen, there's more here. You can do better medicine. You can know more about this detection problem, especially in an ER situation or something like that. So that's what they did. And what we were able to wrap around for them is not only that lovely little movie, but a map of showing lung vasculature and the thickness that you might have in different kinds of situations. And most importantly for them is they wanted to share the concept that was critical to their product, and sometimes words just don't do it justice, that their delivery of contrast improved the detection down the different branching levels of the vasculature. So you can imagine if you start, at kind of the main branch, and you go down the vasculature until something branches, then you get to what we like to call the second level. It's highly scientific, the second level branching. And then, when those branch, then you get to the third level and the fourth level and fifth level. And what we were able to show here, and you can see this kind of color-coded in here, what we were able to show and provide them material with by using this high-end analytics and visualization technique is we were able to teach them, their clients, how their system improved the delivery of contrast agent and detectability at different layers in the vasculature. And that's a pretty powerful concept for them to help their clients learn more. And that's really, really what was important for them. Now, the next thing on our list, I think, is exert influence. And I think this is hilarious because, any of us who've worked with physicians understand what exert influence means. But, through Beth's experience, I think you're going to discover that exert influence probably isn't what you're thinking about. And Beth, maybe you can give us your insight on how exert influence works when physicians are trying to make benefit decisions.
Absolutely. Well, I'll give you my own kind of personal analysis of it. And, you know, I only have 3 credits in psychology, and I may have gotten a B. I'm not really sure. That was many years ago. But if you're familiar at all with physician training, you know that during medical school and that process, you tend to get beat up quite a bit. And the times you get beat up is when really you're not in control. And so what happens when you're not in control is it has a much, well, I'll say, graver impact than those of us who make a mistake. If I have a typo in something, or if I haven't done enough homework on something and make a recommendation to a client, you know, that has an impact. But when you're a physician and you're not in control, patients get hurt. Worst case scenario, patients die. And so they learn very quickly that having control is crucial. Now, sometimes it kind of falls over into other areas of their life, right? So they want to be able to control other things really not related to medicine. But I think it really essentially gets in their core. And so exerting influence really means, in one aspect, having control. And when they have control, they have confidence. And when they have confidence, they have a tendency to want to use that particular device because it gives them more control. Another aspect of exerting influence is also kind of rank and order. How do I stack up against my colleagues? Those on the phone, and we do have some physicians who are on the phone with us today and have registered. You know that it's a very competitive career, and physicians, my own experience is that physicians do not like to be publicly ranked in order in front of their colleagues. But they love to have the feeling of, I'm kind of in the top quadrant, right, or right up there on the top. So that aspect is a very strong motivator. Giving them a marketplace competitive advantage, right? Well, as many of these things do, it touches on a lot of the 5 primary benefits, right? If you've got a marketplace competitive advantage, you're going, because of a particular medical device, you're going to be getting more referrals. You're going to have a little more chutzpah there in the marketplace, and a little more regard. So very important. And then lastly, for the academicians, you know, exerting influence often means publishing. I'm known among my peers for my clinical excellence, and here's the proof. And that's the world of publishing. So those are some elements that I think are that I know are very, very important in being able to exert influence. And now Tim is going to take us through how an imaging product will enhance that ability for a physician to exert influence.
Absolutely, Beth, and you know, it's really, I know as I've been working with you around these 5 motivators for a long time, that exert influence one is always kind of a tricky one, and I think the insight you bring around control and is really important. So, you know, sometimes the best way to use image analysis, in fact, to help give your audience, your target market, the ability to exert influence and be in control, is to actually take analysis work and put it inside of your product, even if that's not the core point of your product. And this is a project, this is a kind of project that we've seen at ImageIQ, strangely enough, in the last year, increasing dramatically, where people say, look, I have a product that either takes images, manages images, or has something to do with data that needs to be presented to a physician, and we want to give them more control. We want to give them more insight as to what's going on and the ability to make a better decision. And that really does ultimately give them improved confidence and gives them enhanced ability to explain. You know, the classic story that you'll see a lot in the medical environment is when, you know, one doctor says, well, I'm waiting for the results of X. I'm waiting for the results from the lab. I'm waiting to get the radiology report. I'm waiting to get the pathology report, that kind of thing, right? And boy, that's not really exerting influence, and it's certainly not having control. In this particular case, which is kind of interesting, I think it's interesting, is we had a group of folks who were actually doing some leading edge imaging with OCT technology, optical coherence tomography. And it was really interesting in that they wanted to get more data out of these images. And if you've ever seen an OCT image, it's very akin to, both from a physics perspective and a look and feel perspective, to like an ultrasound. Ultrasounds are tricky to read, and they're tricky to deal with, and certainly tricky to quantify because they're noisy images, they're very technologist dependent, and that kind of thing. And so they said, hey, listen, can you guys help us embed some very simple analysis tools to just help us identify areas? And you can kind of see it in this picture here, and we actually put it on the computer screen to show you that you can embed some of this stuff in your product and actually make your product help your client exert influence. And that's really important. The number of examples we were thinking about showing you here is actually pretty wide and varied, and part of it was, maybe building some software like this. The other part is we've actually built some software into some areas where, which I thought was really interesting from an exert influence perspective, where we were able to detect that a product was starting to fail and have a component wear out through image analysis. And what that allowed their target market to do in that particular case was say, listen, because of this new feature, they were able to exert influence and say, my system works better. My system stays up longer. My system has more reliability. I've got a team of people who proactively calibrate. I mean, it was just this whole exert influence story that came out of the fact that all we did was, quite frankly, using image and analytics, detect when components were starting to fail as opposed to waiting for them to fail. Something as simple as that can help your customer exert influence, and you can tell that story, which is really, really kind of neat. Now, yep. and we're going to keep moving here.
I'm sorry, you made one comment about quantify, and I really think that's the operative word. And I'm going to throw one little grandchild story in here. It'll be short, but I can't help myself.
This isn't the cupcake story. This is not the cupcake story.
No, it's not the cupcake story. It's not. But,
okay, I'm just checking.
They often, as little ones often do, they get in the habit of saying, "Guess what?" Right? So you have to get them out of that habit. My daughter-in-law said, "We really like to break that." So when they would say, "Guess what?" to me, I would say, "Don't make me guess." Now, I have to tell you, I could quote pretty much every physician I've ever worked with, particularly when we are acquiring medical devices and those types of things. Don't make them guess. Because when they're in situations of guessing and making decisions for patients, if you can give them data that quantifies and helps them make a better decision, that's control, that's exerting influence. And I may get some T-shirts made. Don't make me guess.
Don't make me guess. I like that. I like that. I like that. Hey, you know what? Next time you ask me where your check is, I can say, guess what? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Okay, Beth, it's 20 to the top of the hour. We've got a little bit more to go, and then we can get to some of the questions that have come in. So the next benefit, which is and a motivator, if you will, is really interesting because I don't think we ever would have really guessed that this would have shown up as a benefit for physicians who are trying to make a decision.
Absolutely. It was a bit of a surprise to me, to be real honest. And, so in reading the detail of the study, and by the way, I spoke with Dr. Powell about, I tracked him down about 6 months ago or so, and he said, I didn't think anybody read that textbook. And I said, well, I've kind of built a career around it, Dr. Powell. But anyway, in the study, what they talked about is developing relationships with patients, with specialists, with referring physicians, and with peers. And that patient relationship is really crucial. I mean, if you've ever been with a physician when they had to give patients some difficult news, I can tell you, there is a deep relationship there that is unlike any other. First, the relationship with specialists. If you're a primary care physician, they want their patients taken very good care of if they're, sending that patient to a specialist. They want to make sure that that patient gets absolutely the best care. And, of course, that's crucially important to the referring physician because that goes back to benefit number one, earn more. Never known a referring physician who didn't want, a specialist who didn't want more referrals. So those relationships are very important to them, and of course the relationships with their peers. They most identify with themselves as physicians, really beyond any other kind of societal aspect. And so that peer relationship is very, very important to them. So anything that you can do to help with your product or in explaining your product that will help them enrich those relationships, again, is a very motivating factor, and they're making the decision to use your medical device or someone else's. And so how do you develop that? How do you enrich that kind of a relationship? Well, one of the things that I have used and works quite well is to develop a visual marketing kit. And that means providing the kind of data in a very visual way in really content marketing, right? Developing pieces of information that can be used and distributed in many different ways. So whether that's a peer-reviewed paper or white paper or video. So for instance, if you have a video somewhat similar to the one that Tim showed with the lung vessels, to be able to use that and have it available in social media, on YouTube or on your website, et cetera, so that let's say I'm a surgeon, I want to be able to show a referring physician the level of information that I have that I can acquire about the patients that you're sending to me. Incredibly powerful. To be able to use that information in webinars. Have a website portal where all of your content, especially the visual components, are available. That is another layer of add-on that I think you'll find your competitors will not be doing, and it will be tremendously well received by your customers.
Yeah, and Beth, it's really interesting that you say that, because when we were building this webinar, I personally, and I have more of the scientific bent, right? I really struggled with this. I'm like, so Beth, what you're telling me is to market to your clients, you got to help them market to their clients.
That's right.
Yeah, that's it. That's what we're looking for. And we have kind of an interesting example about this. If you present data, right? Data is boring, right? I mean, so here's an example of somebody who, let's pretend there was a popular. This is a little bit of a little bit
fun
of a
diversion.
soft example. Yeah, fun diversion. That's a good way to put it. Fun diversion. Let's say you had somebody out there who, maybe they were making some products that helped men with male pattern baldness, right? And they did a study because and one of the questions that's come in here, Beth, that maybe we'll answer at the end is, how does this fit into your FDA regulations on marketing? And we'll talk about that a little bit. But let's say they wanted to make a claim that this improved your hair coverage or your hairline by 20% or something like that. You could present the data. And you could present the data like this, and data might be boring, and data is interesting. The other side of the equation is you can present pictures, right? Now, I got to tell you, to be very honest with you, when I was trying to put these pictures in the PowerPoint slide, you got to read them from left to right. Okay, so their product is improving the hair situation. For me, I kept going, man, I kept wanting to put them the other way, but that's my own personal problem. But you could try to tell your story with pictures. You could help your clients market their story visually with pictures. But the real power is when you bring them both together. And really, that's kind of the interesting story. Deliver the entire scientific story so that they can build the relationships with their patients, with the other physicians in that, whether it's in a formal accountable care organization or an informal accountable care organization where there is a group of physicians caring for a patient. When you can deliver visual stories with the data, it helps them build those relationships. And that's really, really, really critical, right? And so that's how it kind of works. And here you've kind of got some before and after photos.
It's a good point with your examples, Ken. Is an image is an image. It doesn't necessarily have to be a CT or an MRI. It can be a visual light, as I've learned. I call them pictures, but Tim calls them visual light.
The geeks, we call them visual light, yes.
Yes. And, it might be, anything that produces an image, a video. It doesn't necessarily have to be medical. So
that's true. That's true. It doesn't. It certainly doesn't have to be radiological, right? I mean, we do a lot of work with in the wound healing area and things like that, where you are taking dermatological. That's a hard word. I don't even know if that's really a word, but we do a lot of areas in that. Now, We've got one more benefit, Beth. We're coming up on the top of the hour, and actually it's amazing. I kind of have a little dashboard here. I can't believe how many of you have stayed with us for the whole webinar. Thank you very much. It's probably the biggest compliment you can pay somebody is if you feel that the webinar is adding enough value or you hang on. And quite literally, everyone who registered at the beginning of the webinar and signed in is still here. So thank you all for being here. You know, the last benefits that we think of is relieving suffering. But the interesting twist on that is it's not just their patient suffering, but it's potentially their own suffering. So maybe you could share some of your experience with that.
Absolutely. Well, you could do a whole webinar, about a 10-hour webinar on this one, and relieving suffering. And the interesting part is their own or that of their patients. And I just wanted to share one little data point. Medscape did a study in 2012 of 24,000 doctors representing 25 specialties. Only 54% would choose medicine as a career again. That's an all-time low since they've been doing this study. And why is that? And I referenced this a little bit earlier. That is because it's a very, very difficult time to be a physician because of all the changes in healthcare, because of the challenges that you have in being a third-party payer system, and people using very sophisticated systems to try and get the physicians to actually practice medicine in a different way, always not in the best interest of the patient. So, Tim, if we can get the next slide up here.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, thank you. So what does that mean? Well, for them, when you say relieve their own suffering, it means fewer hassles. So product problems. Nothing upsets a physician more than going to do a procedure and having a product that isn't functioned properly. Okay, lost the revenue, lost the time, had an impact on the relationship with the patient, etc. Administrative time, again, a greater and greater burden. Right now, the average admin time that a physician spends is about 12 hours a week. That's a tremendous amount of time. Loss of procedure time, loss of peer stature. Again, no fun to be embarrassed in front of your colleagues. And they do not like to be a part of product recalls, as maybe some of you, I hope not, but maybe some of you have experienced, right? It has tremendous impact. So anything you can do to help them relieve their own hassles or their own suffering is going to be very motivating for them. And of course, ultimately, why do you go into medicine? You go into medicine to relieve the suffering of the patients that you treat. At the end of the day, all 5 of these are motivators. It's a very hard job just to become a physician, much less continue to be one. I can't imagine, certainly no one I've ever worked with has ever not been motivated by this factor. So
yeah,
how do you use imaging to be able to relieve their suffering? And of course, ultimately, that's what your product does in terms of, relieve suffering for a patient. I hope it does.
Yeah, I hope so. But, and Beth, you bring up a good point, right? We've got some really interesting dynamics going on right now where patients are exceptionally educated. I put the WebMD logo up here to show,
right.
I talked to my doctor, and he's like, look, man, people come in here, they know more about their condition than I do because I just haven't had time to stay up with all this stuff. So, one of the ways you can help your target market understand how they can relieve suffering is through the use of imaging. Imagine that. That's kind of been the theme here. Here's an example that we have where we had a client who was interested in having a conversation about how their pharmaceutical, strangely enough, helped relieve suffering, and specifically in the roles of polycystic kidney disease, which is a rough disease, and it's a relatively rare disease. And they wanted to be able to show their physicians how they could educate their patients about what's happening to their patients here. And we worked through them about all sorts of metrics that we can quantify for a single time point and longitudinally across a bunch of other time points. Say, listen, you can tell your patients about what's going to happen to their kidney and the volume and the density of that. And maybe the patients won't care, but they probably do. And you can help them relieve the anxiety that they may be suffering from. We were able to deliver them some analysis software that actually helped do this kind of work and show different cysts and all these different things that are going on with these patients that a physician needed to be educated on to help their patients relieve their suffering. And this is a really interesting approach to how to use image analysis to actually bring the idea of relieving suffering through imaging together. And it may sound silly, but one of the best things, and Beth, you and I talked about this, right? One of the best things that sometimes you can do for a patient to help relieve their suffering is sit down there and just show them what's going on. Hey, here's the MRI you had. Remember when you sat in that thing and it was banging around all the time for 20 minutes? Here's the MRI. Here's what we've discovered, right?
And to be able to interpret that without having had the benefit of medical school, right? Imaging analytics can be very powerful in that.
Exactly, exactly. So, ultimately we ended up delivering them a bunch of data too, and they could actually say, hey, listen, to their patient, you're doing better than average. You're actually progressing well. We've got you on this treatment, and that's kind of how it works. So really, look, those are the big five. You probably, want to know, how do you know if you already have this data, right? There they are. There's the big five. One of the things we talked about real quick, and then we'll have time for a couple of questions, is I did a little bit of what we call imaging bites, which is kind of cute if you say it the right way. Imaging bites about how to create marketing sizzle from your data that you might have collected in your clinical trials. And what's interesting about that is that it turns out that in our experience, a lot of times the marketing team kind of ends up being the tail that at the end of the movie, and maybe the medical device companies don't quite integrate marketing as well as say Pixar does or Disney does when all the toys hit McDonald's the same day the movie's released, kind of thing. And sometimes marketing ends up at the wrong end of this, and they're under a lot of pressure. I did a little video on how you can maybe take a look at some of the data that was acquired during your clinical trials and see if you can repurpose it for the use of marketing. Really interesting. You can visit us at our Imaging Analytics University website if you want to take a look at that. So that's kind of fun. So we're at the end of our webinar. We have a couple of questions. You'll still be on mute. You're welcome to type in a question if you want, and I think this is really funny. We did do a little bit of death by PowerPoint here, but hopefully it was valuable for you. Beth, thank you very much for your insight and adding that marketing flavor to what we do as kind of image analysis scientists. I think it's a very powerful concept for people to understand and see how that would work.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
No problem, no problem. Now we've got a couple of questions here, and I think let's go with the first one, and maybe I'll take a crack at this one. One question is, how does this stuff, how does all what you're talking about fit in with the FDA? And it seems like maybe the question is a little bit, what does the FDA have to say about this? So, Beth, if you don't mind, I'll take a crack at that one, right?
Absolutely.
The concept behind marketing and the FDA, there are a lot of smart folks at the FDA, and what they're trying to make sure is that you represent what your product does in safety. It's safe for the public, and it does what it says it can do. You're not selling snake oil. At the end of the day, if you're going to change your product claims, or like kind of our contrived Rogaine example, if you will, if you're going to say this does something and improves this by 20%, obviously that's something that you're going to be able to take this data and you're going to have to run it through an FDA process. And you've got folks in your regulatory department that can help you understand that. What I can tell you is that teams that we've interacted with, and the folks we've interacted with who have had these kinds of conversations within the FDA, is that the folks at the FDA are actually demanding more of this. They are requiring and they're asking you very pointed questions about, well, how can you show me scientifically with good controls and quantitative data and not double-blind reads and not just somebody having an opinion that this is really what's going on. And so they've been very receptive to the concept with the caveat that you have scientific rigor behind it, right? You're not just making pretty pictures, they're actually developing good science. So that's certainly one of the areas where that works out. Let's see, Beth, I'm going to look at a couple of other questions here. We got another one here. Let me read this one real quickly here so if I can interpret this. That's a great question. We talked, I'll try to read this and paraphrase it a little. We mentioned the difficulty about selecting medicine as a profession. Beth, you mentioned that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because of a lot of the changes being required today. And the question is really, do you think it's the nature of this kind of this the word they use is disruptive digital uses, which might break down those traditional silos of medicine, that introducing digital technologies into medicine might actually change the way we think about, I'm paraphrasing here, so hopefully I'm capturing the essence of your question, the silos of medicine, the specialist concept of medicine or something like that. So I don't know, Beth, if you want to offer any insight into that? Or?
Yeah, well, I think, and not even related to a medical device, but related to electronic medical records, has certainly had a tremendous impact on the way that physicians practice medicine and the level of information that is available to them at the point of decision making, and things like decision support systems and those types of things. I mean, is a tremendous change. It would be as if someone took your car and they put in something that no longer resembled a steering wheel, or wheels. No, we don't use wheels anymore. So you have to kind of relearn, and there is a learning curve with all that, and times 100, or times 1,000. So you've got an EMR, but then you look at all the medical devices that you're using. It is very, very different. I mean, surgery used to be a scalpel, so. And many of you have brought incredible technologies, but with that comes stress. And that's why anything you can do to relieve their suffering or stress and make it easier to use, or provide, information that is crucial in a way that's easily understood and certainly visually, that can only relieve their suffering related to, the challenges they have and career satisfaction.
Good point. Good point. We've got two other questions. I'm going to try to sneak them in before the top of the hour. One is really easy. One was, what's the rendering software that was used for the 3D screw analysis? That was actually some software that ImageIQ wrote, so that was our own stuff. The other question is, what % of studies are audited for data quality from the FDA, and is there do the auditor folks have imaging background to understand what they're looking at? That's a great question. I probably can't give you a percentage of audited, because quite frankly, a lot of times, imaging is integrated into another component of the trial, so the imaging part is a subset, so it's probably just the standard number. Do they have the expertise? I will tell you this. Our experience has been, especially in the last couple of years, it seems like, that there are folks inside the FDA who really do understand the power of imaging and image analysis, and how to integrate that into the traditional double-blind reading concept and that kind of stuff. So we've actually seen an increase in terms of, from the FDA team, in terms of just their level of awareness, their acceptance of it, and their expertise in it. It's great. I know this is going to sound a little silly, but we haven't had a bad conversation. Right? It's always been it's a challenging conversation, but it hasn't been bad. How are you controlling this? How are you measuring that? How does this work? Can you prove to me that this is validated? All the good quality system stuff that we do anyway, but they want to see that. And it's always been a wonderful, wonderful situation. So, Beth, we are at the top of the hour, and
Okay.
I would like to thank all of you again for joining us on our webinar. Beth, thank you for joining us on the ImageIQ webinar. It's been a wonderful time sharing this kind of knowledge with everyone, and everyone have a wonderful week.
Bye, everyone. Have a great week. Apply
Thanks.
the 5 benefits. Bye.
You got it. Thanks.